Hey, good evening. It's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. I want to respond tonight to a question I had from a viewer about the differences between taking a cutting from your landscape or from the roses I have in my greenhouse behind me here, ones that I take regularly for my business here, and the kind that you would take from a bouquet rose, the kind that you would find in a flower shop. And the answer is there isn't a lot of technical difference. I would take both at the semi-hardwood stage. These ones here, by necessity, because the flower is in bloom, that's basically just the stage that the stems are going to be in. They're firm, but not too firm yet. They're ready for a cutting. These ones here, in my landscape, I choose at exactly the same stage, either just before or just after the roses have bloomed. I check and see how firm the wood is here, and if it's semi-hardwood, that's a good stage to take cuttings. So there isn't a lot of difference between them. There are a couple of key disadvantages to taking cuttings of stem roses, of bouquet roses, over taking ones from your landscape. And I'll go over those towards the end of the video, but from a practical point of view of taking the cuttings, it isn't a lot of difference except for one thing. The main thing is that when I take this stem from the landscape, I can choose everything about it. I can look around on the shrub and I can have a look at the stems and I can see exactly what stage of growth it's in. So when you look at where you're taking a cutting on these, I always take a cutting below a node, and I'll show you a close-up of a node here. I take one below a node and I take one above a leaf node. So this is basically one of my cuttings here. But I can look at the condition of the buds that are coming out here, and again I'll show you a close-up of this. But if the bud on this one here is kind of flat to the stem or just rounded bump, kind of greenish, that's a good stage to take the cutting in. And if it's like this one here, where the bud is kind of elongated and already expressing and sticking out, that's not as good. And I'll explain the reason here is because when you take this, two things have to happen for this cutting. I'm just going to trim some leaves off here because you don't need that many leaves for a cutting. But two things have to happen. It has to root and it has to shoot. And it has to happen in that order, basically. If you develop the shoots up here, like this one is starting to, if you develop the shoots first, then the roots are supposed to come later, it will actually just die in the meantime. So by the time it starts shooting, you actually have to have some roots developing. So on these ones here, you don't always get that choice. On this here, actually, the bud is nice and flat, but if it were sticking out, you wouldn't get much of a choice over that. The second thing is, again, choosing these in the landscape, I can take a little bit of care to make sure I have the right stage of wood here, that it isn't too soft, it isn't too brittle. On this one here, this stem, as I pull it, there you go, it's thick, but it was grown very soft by the grower. So that there is actually not a suitable stage for cutting. If I took that, you'd find that cutting that, you'd find it's nice and white and pithy on the inside. It's just soft and spongy. That's not going to make a good cutting. So being able to choose on the rose the right spot to take your cutting is the great advantage of taking cuttings from ones in your landscape. But it still can be done from these if you get a chance to select the stems in the store. So this one here is nowhere near as soft as the other one I just showed you. So I actually could probably get a good cutting from this. And to take a cutting, I'm looking for a spot on the rose. These top ones here, these top sort of semi-leaves, they're not really full true leaves. I'm looking for a set of leaves. These ones here, if I cut way up there, I haven't had good success that way before. So I'm going to cut just above this leaf here, and then I'm going to cut below this node here. And this is in a good semi-hardwood stage for cuttings. Once again, I mentioned that I don't like to leave a ton of leaves on for the next step here, but the next step is to dip, in this case rooting hormone. Do knock off as much powder as you can do. You just have to have just a light coating, and then place the rose into the pot. The pot is filled with just a sterile rooting media. You can use Pro Mix or Sunshine Mix or one of the peat-based mixes. I'm just using a composted wood fiber product here, so that's nice and sterile. And I'll just side by side, just to repeat the process here, do one of the cuttings from the landscape here. Again, above a node, the leaf node, where the leaf comes out of the stem. At the bottom, below a node. You're only looking for enough space below that node. It might be a 1/4 inch, might be 3 millimeters, something like that. So just barely below that node. A quick dip, and into the pot like that. Now this here, when you're trying to get it to root, and semi-hardwood cuttings will root at this stage in about 3 weeks or so. Three to 4 weeks is usually when I can pull on them and I find out that they've started to root to the bottom, or started to at least callus and start to develop young roots into the bottom of that pot. In the meantime, you have to make sure these don't dry out. You're not watering to water the soil media, you're actually using a mist. And I'm not going to mist with this, but you could mist by hand. What this is my my tool cleaner. So to make sure I'm working with a nice clean tool, I use this disinfectant between cuts, which I wanted to mention as well. So this here, you can place that in my case, I have automated mist on my benches, but you can place it in a bit of a shady place, someplace where it isn't going to dry out too quickly, and mist it regularly yourself, or you can place it under a humidity tent. I personally don't prefer the humidity tent methods. It's resulted in more rot and less successful rooting. So I usually like to have the open air and a regular mist on it. Now I mentioned that there are a couple of disadvantages to using bouquet stems, and aside from the fact that you just can't choose the stage of your stem the way you'd like to, because again, they're grown soft, they're grown elsewhere, so you really can't tell until you get your hands on them if they have the right firmness to make a semi-hardwood cutting. The second thing is that because it came from a bouquet, in many cases you won't know what variety that is. And not knowing the variety is a disadvantage because all you know about this plant now is just the flower. Now don't get me wrong, knowing that it has a nice flower is a good start, but it doesn't tell you anything about the plant's growth habit. It doesn't tell you how healthy it is in foliage, what size the plant is, how it will grow in your garden, and that's important information to know. Also, not knowing the variety name leaves you in a position where you actually don't know if you have the legal right to propagate from this plant. So I certainly wouldn't sell anything without a name. And even propagating myself, I hesitate to try propagating a plant that I don't know the name of, because I don't actually have a legal right. It could be a plant that's under patent protection, and I don't want to go ahead and earn myself a bad reputation by cutting other people's plants without it being through the patent period or having the legal right to do so. So that's my notes on propagating from bouquet stems. If you have any questions on propagation at all, I made a whole other video on semi-hardwood cuttings which you can refer to, but I'm happy to take questions below this one here. Thank you so much for watching.